You're very welcome to Radio Espial, episode 76, The Murder of Charles Self. Thank you, as always, to our recent subscribers, and also a very special thank you for those super thanks that we got during the week. And I know you always appreciate the work that myself and Brian do. We've got a really extensive case here, and we're going to push on with it. It is the case, as I say, of Charles Self. Charles Charlie Self was an English-born Scottish set and stage designer who worked at RTE from 1978. He was attacked violently and murdered at his home in January 1982. Charles had worked at the BBC during the 1970s, and he was recruited by RTE's head of design, Alpha O'Reilly, in 1978. He relocated from Scotland to Monkstown, Dublin. He soon became the main set designer for Ireland's flagship Late Late Show, broadcast live on TV every Saturday night, hosted by presenter Gay Byrne. Charles shared a home at an Annesley Mews on Brighton Avenue in Monkstown with MTV video DJ and broadcaster Vincent Handley, aka and known as Fab Vinny. Charles's body was found at their house just before 9 a.m. on the morning of the 21st of January 1982 by a house guest. Charles lay in a pool of his own blood at the bottom of the stairs in the hallway, right beside the front door, having been stabbed multiple times. Almost 43 years on, no one has ever been charged or convicted of Charles Self's murder. Charles Benedict Self was born on the 14th of February 1949 in England, but he was raised most of his early life in Scotland. His mother died when he was very young, and his father worked in the army. His early life was anything but normal, and ultimately he was raised mostly by his aunt in Oswald Street, Glasgow, a stone's throw from the banks of the River Clyde. Charles's initial years of youth and education remain very sketchy. Despite losing his mother at such a young age, it did not hinder Charles. He grew up to be a bright, gregarious and social child, and his aunt in Glasgow became his de facto mother. He always referred to his aunt with friends and colleagues in later life as his mother, and he formed a deep bond with her. Following his school years in college, by the early 1970s, now in his early 20s, Charles landed himself a set design position at the BBC, working for both their Scottish and London studios across several years. TV and chat shows were now booming in Britain, and Charles quickly established a name for himself in the media as someone who was quick, sharp, with new ideas, and could keep up with a rapidly developing media industry. Bright in mind and dress, Charles's career was flourishing at home in Britain and soon abroad. In 1978, aged 29, the bright lights of Glasgow and London were soon exchanged for a new emerging media challenge in Dublin, Ireland. He agreed to accept an offer from Irish national broadcaster RTE after the strong recommendation of the then Director of Design, Alpha O'Reilly. Charles, after his relocation, found himself working on some of RTE's top flagship programmes at the time and began living in a courtyard mews in a small two-bedroomed house in Monkstown, Dublin. In the winter of 1981 into 1982, he shared the property with Irish MTV USA presenter Vincent Handley, by then Handley had become something of an international star of music TV. From his early days on Irish radio and TV, and Vincent travelled a great deal for his work. It is very clear that the property had become a short stay point at times by people Charles knew from the Irish media industry, and he loved nothing more than to host late night drinks or dinner parties with a few friends he trusted well. Despite his gregariousness, his sharp wit, his outgoing and bubbly nature, Charles was actually very particular about who stayed and frequented his home in Monkstown. What is clear is that either someone staying or invited back to the house in the early hours of the 21st of January 1982 was responsible for the horrific murder of Charles. Before we really get into this timeline, you've saw and heard the summary of the case and the background. Now, I know you do your best, all of you subscribers and even people coming to the channel for the first time, to be respectful. That's all we ever ask on the channel. So before we begin the timeline, as with all murders, we have to deal with sensitive details in this case. This is a brutal crime. The nature and detail of a death, a lifestyle, notwithstanding the off whispers of who done it, I get all that. But what we're not going to tolerate here on the channel is those who wish to use this case specifically to further their own personal agendas, particularly moral and religious agendas. Back then, this case was 43 years ago. If you're not happy and you don't like the way we do things here, digital door, out the door you go. You don't like it, good luck to you. We're not here to play judge and jury, particularly on a victim. Okay? Off you go if you don't like it. I always say that you must place yourself in the moment, the year, the time of the case. This murder case is from 1982, Charles Self. Maybe I'm showing my age on the channel. If 1982 was now 2025, then we'd be talking about a case from 1939. So please bear that in mind when you think about things on how the case was investigated, technology, all sorts of things. You know, we would be talking then about a case from the Second World War. Perspective and respect are important in any case we do, but particularly this one. As was the Ireland of 1982, I'd had that some, perhaps many, of our subscribers were not even born in that year, or just very young children. If that is the case, and I was only 14 years of age then, don't own it or try to own it. That's the biggest problem I come across when we examine cases historically, particularly this cold case. Kids adopt and try their own parents' history, views and biases without question, and then they find out they've actually lived their own lives, experienced their own lives, and they then must examine their own adopted parental views in an adult world. Brian, you're very welcome as always. There's a lot in this case, isn't there? You're very welcome as always.
Right. Thanks,
Mick. With us.
Thanks, Mick. Hello, folks, and thanks for all your support and kind words on the videos there. Much appreciated. Yeah, horrific case, Mick. Yeah, and like you say, putting yourself back in 1982. I was only a small fella then, but I remember it all right. I mean, you had the Falklands War. They won the Triple Crown in the rugby. Yeah, grisly stuff, and a whole load of stuff going on around it as well. This is not an awful lot of depth in this one, and still unsolved, tragically.
Charles Self quickly explored the active gay scene after moving to Dublin. It's new to him, and he will learn that the climate and laws in Ireland are not quite so welcoming. In fact, key milestones including the decriminalisation of male homosexuality would not happen until 1993, but there was a thriving gay community and activism movement challenging the long Irish religious status. The path would be long and would not happen for many years to come. And yet, shock horror, the media Charles was working in, and most other people in December, January 1981 into 1982, were more concerned with the weather back then. This was a time when homophobic views were long established, but exasperated by the misunderstandings of and rise in cases of HIV in Ireland by 1982, and probably well into 1982 at this stage. For Charles, he found a kinship and home working in the media, with a diverse mix of both eclectic and highly traditional thinking minds. Now, in December 1991, Charles spent some days with his mother. Remember, his mother was his aunt. Charles was brought up by his aunt, but he considered her his mother, in Glasgow, and returned to Dublin for the new year. All was good, as with most media national stations at the time, and still now. Many reduced their staffing for the Christmas period and New Year before returning to their normal schedules. And this is when the so-called Big Snow of 1982 arrived. Now, what began on Thursday, January the 7th, as a 36-hour blizzard of snow would affect the country for at least the next 2 weeks. It would be late January before many transport, educational and civic services returned to normal. This is important as to the forensics and practicality of this case, something often forgotten in regards to how it unfolded. The countless witnesses on record mentioned the impact on the use of private cars, public transport services including taxis availability, daily work routines, and a period when everyone just basically kind of switched off. And even by late January, made allowances and excuses due to the weather. We're going to hear an audio insert from a friend of Charles, Christine Falls.
Well, I suppose when I met him, and I can't put my finger on the absolute date that I met him, I just took to him. He had a lovely face. He had a lovely smile. He was very bubbly. He was very, very sociable and friendly. He was generous and lively and gossipy, and always impeccably groomed as well. And very out there sometimes in his choice, especially of jackets. He'd wear bright, vivid colours, and he was fun. He was fun. He had, one-liners. If Charles didn't like something, or didn't like something someone said, there would be an instant rejoinder, and it could be withering, but usually very, very accurate. You could have a kind of fear if you did get on the wrong side of him, which thankfully I didn't. He really didn't give a damn about holding his opinion, if you like. But he was very straight. It meant you knew where you stood with him at any given time, But yes, he had great put-down liners, a great observer because of his profession as well, which, designer. We were all totally aware of what he did, and also the fact that he worked on the most iconic show on RTE. He was the designer for The Late Late Show. So we would have known that, but he was quite a modest man. He wasn't a braggart. He wouldn't go, "Oh, look at me, I work on the Late Late." But having said that, very confident as a man in terms of what he did and his talent.
Now that was Christine. January 11th to the 15th, 1982. Back at work and busy, Charles has a mixed week. What we do know is that he had two significant events. His impeccable record of hitting design schedules is rewarded when his department boss, Adam Police, arranged a meeting. 4 years into his RTE career, a pay rise is on the cards, and the pair agreed to meet and sign off on it the following week. Charles equipped comically to colleagues that he might need it. Charles drove a quirky yellow Renault 5. Like so many cars at the time, in the adverse weather, it had decided to pack up and remain stranded in the RTE Donnybrook car park for several days. I remember actually a neighbour having one of these, and I remember at the time, yeah, theirs also packed up. Charles decides to leave it there in the car park of Donnybrook until the full thaw, and instead began to use the bus to and from work. Now, on Wednesday, January the 20th, 1982, this is the eve of the murder. Charles's housemate at their Annesley Mews, Vincent Hanley, is away in London recording TV work, and despite the weather and inconvenience of no car, Charles continues his active social nights out. That's an image of the Annesley Mews in Brighton Avenue, Monkstown. Again, perspective and time. This is a later image. I think this is from the late 2000s. This is not the way that area looked, and the house that you're looking at, I believe Charles's house was actually much further down the end of this actual avenue. Now, Charles gets the bus to work from Monkstown to Donnybrook and follows a regular routine. Nothing is out of the ordinary that day, with Vincent away in London and possibly planning a more permanent move from the house. Charles has suggested that his friend Christine Fall, you just heard from her, stay there for a while. They had arranged to talk that evening on the phone ahead of her move in. The Annesley on Brighton Avenue, Monkstown, has seen many house guests come and go for stayovers and periodic stays. Charles's close friend Bill Maher had stayed at the Mews previously for about 6 months when Charles first moved to Ireland in the late 1970s, 1978. However, Bill had long moved out of the house at this stage. We're going to hear some words from Bill, and this is more about how Bill kind of met up with Charles, and you're going to hear him talk about that infamous quirky Renault 5, yellow Renault 5, on his own Renault 5.
I met Charles in 1980, and he was probably on the edge of a group that I sort of socialised with, and I wasn't particularly close to Charles, but how we really bonded was my father bought me a car down the country because I'd got a job that required that you had to own a car, and my father bought me this car down the country in Tipperary, and I drove it back up to town on Sunday night in time to go for a pint, and I was driving past a pub called I think it was called the Clarendon Inn on Clarendon Street. It's now Bar Rua, and it was gay at the time, or gay-ish, and Charles was coming out the door just as I drove by, and I remember putting his hand up to his head and letting out an exclamation, you know, because he thought his car had been stolen and that I was driving, you know. So I stopped, and we got pally after that. I mean, the car was very distinctive. Meeting the Bailey, predominantly. I mean, that's where we would have socialised mostly in those days, you know. And then I eventually moved into the Mews. I moved in there for 6 months to London on one or two trips together, and I drove the yellow car over. We'd be in touch nearly every day. We just got on well. There was no involvement romantically or anything like that. We were just pals.
Now, before we begin the events of the incident day, it is important to clarify that one guest staying at the Mews on the evening of January the 20th, 1982 was Bertrand Bertie Trier, 66 years of age, then also a set and graphic designer for RTE. Bertie had his own cottage in Wicklow, I think it was in Arklow, but in the month of January 1982, and the circumstances of the weather, Charles allowed Bertie to stay at the house on and off. So he'd stay there previously as well, and he would stay in Vincent's bedroom, particularly when Vincent Hanley was away, if he did not want to make the long journey home. through the Dublin Wicklow Mountains. Now, January the 20th, on that day, 12:30 to 1 p.m, Charles leaves his office in RTE Studios, Donnybrook. It's a cold day, but not by any means extreme. The thaw has been coming, and for the past week, temperatures were rising during daylight from freezing to 5 to 7 degrees at the time. Charles's main port of call on many lunchtime days was the Bailey pub on Duke Street, South Dublin. There he meets Bill Maher and several other friends. He's no stranger to the place. Bill is working for a company on Baggot Street. They have both become good friends. The pair are not in any way romantically involved as gay men. Now, there's a note here. Perhaps a case shocker to some. Gay men can actually have platonic and good relationships and friendships with men as well as women for no other reason than company and friendship. Just as both men and women have perfectly close relationships with the opposite sex without the complication of sex or romance, I still find it baffling, even in this age, that some folk cannot transcend and escape their own biases and prejudices in 2025 and often dictate to them by their parents when they were young. But, you know, hey ho. 2:45 to 2:50 p.m. Charles finishes his last drink, and there are some vague promises of meeting up later that evening after work in their usual pub haunts. This is with Bill. The pair return to their respective places of work. Bill on Baggot Street, Charles back to the Donnybrook studios. Bill Maher, as they say their casual goodbyes, has no idea it will be the last time he ever sees his dear friend alive. Instead, Bill decides not to head to the city straight after work. He goes there instead later. Sure, he'll probably see Charles on the Saturday or Sunday. In actual fact, Bill did go in, but he was somewhere else in the city that evening. 4 to 4:30 p.m. Charles meets with his boss, Alan Police, for the second time that day. He has been very impressed with Charles's work on the Late Late Show and Twink's Christmas show. Both had done extremely well in the ratings over that Christmas period. The audience numbers and general reception to every show Charles has worked on has been, you know, pretty good, and the numbers are lining up. Bertie Troyer will later confirm that it is around this time, 3:30 to 4 p.m, that he last sees Charles while he's busy at work. I believe they sort of briefly met in the corridors, coming and going from meetings and doing their set design work. Now 6 to 6:30 p.m. So the only way is up for Charles. It's understood Charles left his Donnybrook office around this time. We cannot be precise about the timings of the next events in our timeline. Not unlike Charles, it appears he briefly returned from Donnybrook by bus to his home in Monkstown and was soon already on his way back to Dublin City. Hectic, yes, but this was a regular pattern for Charles, including weekdays as well as weekends. Charles, he was a party animal. He went out most evenings. 7:30 to 8 p.m. While waiting at
about the
Sorry,
time.
Brian. Yeah, I'm getting ahead of myself. I should have brought you.
No, I just to throw it out there as well that this is 1982. This is 2 years before the Dart.
Yeah.
As well. So no, there was rail there before that, but I mean the Dart.
It's primarily busing. You're busing our taxi.
So you're busing it, yeah, and so it was 2 years before the Dart came in, and furthermore, there would have been a lot less traffic on the road that you can as well, like, so but to have been like quicker to get around some places, all right, as well. So just to call that out as well there.
Yeah. 7:38 p.m. So while waiting at the bus stop into the city centre, he was picked up by a sympathetic motorist who dropped him off at O'Connell Street. That's the main street in Dublin, right in the centre of the city. Now, we've never been able to verify or identify this driver, but Garda did confirm in appeals about this case over the years that they had contact with this driver. We're at 8:30 p.m. So Charles has now made his way across the city down to the Bailey pub on Duke Street, which is on the south side of the city, where he had met Bill Maher earlier that day. It was just a brief stop off, perhaps wondering if Bill was there and anyone who might accompany him on the night's drinks. Again, we must remind ourselves that this is 1982. No mobile phones, much to the general public, still using public telephone boxes, and arrangements to meet up were made variably or more often in an ad hoc way. You just knew where a friend would be at a place at a certain time. Little did Charles know that his friend Bill Maher was actually that night had gone into town impromptu and was just 10 metres away, directly across the road in Davy Byrne's pub at that very time. We're going to hear from Bill talking about, he had no idea Charles was across the road in the Bailey.
Now, I loosely arranged to meet him again that night in the Bailey, but I didn't make it, and I was in fact across the road in Davy Byrne's, and I often regret that I didn't come across, that maybe things would have been different,
Now, soon after, Charles moved on to South William Street. I think it was that pub there was called the South William Street Inn, I think, and that was around 9:30 p.m. Again, he cannot have spent much more than an hour or so at either of the venues, the Bailey and then the South William Inn. This is at 10:45 to 11 p.m. What we do know is that sometime just before 11 p.m. he arrived at Bartley Dunn's pub in Stephen Street Lower. Years later, the pub would be demolished and become part of what we now know, if you're familiar with Dublin, as the Stephen's Green shopping centre complex. That's where the side of it is where Bartley Dunn's on the Stephen's Green Lower Street. That's where that pub was located. Then it was a mixed bar and meeting point for gay men who knew they would have no hassle, be safe and accepted there. Now, for those familiar with the Dublin pub scene at the time, Charles frequented pubs that were considered, should we say, either mixed or gay friendly. So there was a burgeoning scene that the gay community saw as much more welcoming, where they wouldn't have hassle or wouldn't have any trouble.
I don't know. There weren't places I was frequenting.
Yeah, but that's the thing. That's the thing. I mean,
there was a couple in Cork. I think they used to have. I think it was slicks and satchmos and loafers were the three that they used to.
But in any city at that time, I think there was an emerging scene where there were pubs, and it wasn't. There was a thing about Bartley Dunn's that was. It was a gay pub. Bartley Dunn's was never a gay pub. It was just extremely friendly and open to the gay community. And I went there. I drank there. I drank in the Bailey as well. Charlemagne Inn. Not so much South William Street. Yeah. But these are.
Sorry, was Bartley Dunn's on the same side as where Sinnott's is now, or was it the other side of the?
Sinnott's is much closer to the area of Dame Street.
The other side is it where it's
No, Sinnott's is on the Grafton Street side, but it's much lower down. The Bartley Dunn's is much further up towards the Stephen's Green shopping centre. But it's on the same stretch, same south side.
Sorry, I suppose just to mention there as well, that area as well, you would have had there was some of the theatres weren't a million miles away.
There's a theatre. There was. I can't even think. I should be able to now. There's a theatre actually almost opposite Bartley Dunn's at the time, and the Stephen's Green Centre, which is still there. There is a theatre there. So you get the sense of why media people, also journalists, frequented the place. You get the style of the lifestyle of the people who fashionable people kind of thing. So that's kind of the circles that Charles moved in. 11 p.m. Around this time, Bertie Troyer, remember he's the occasional house guest, returns from work as a set designer for RTE. Whatever arrangements had been made, and we do not know the full details, Bertie has a set of keys for the Annesley Mews in Monkstown. The weather is bad, and he is once again staying the night rather than returning home to Arklow in Wicklow. Now, 11:30 to 11:45. Charles himself, this is around the time we believe he leaves Bartley Dunn's up at the Stephen's Green, what is now the Stephen's Green Centre, at closing time. Last orders at this time in Irish pubs, please understand, were pretty much strictly 11 p.m. And
and then just 11:30 in the summer, so
and then it moved to
flip over
11:30,
like,
and now, well, yeah, you're talking about 12:30, 1 o'clock, even in some standard bars now in the city centre.
I suppose the point of him getting in before 11 then is you can get your last order in, and
That's what he was going there for, yeah.
A bit of leeway then, but you'd want to be in the door before 11 because you're not going to walk in after 11 and get away.
Yeah, it's straight in. It's straight in.
Yeah.
2 or 3 minutes to the scream of last orders and 2 points of Guinness, please. You know.
Yeah.
So that's what was going on there.
Yeah.
He leaves and between 11:30 and 11:45, and he headed alone to the Hot Pot Cafe on the River Liffey's Borkey, right in the centre of the city. There are maps coming up, or outtake of maps, so don't panic, you will see them. Now, 12 o'clock, midnight, to 12:10.
Sorry, I suppose just to clarify, those of you not familiar with Dublin, the Liffey flows through the middle. It's in one, there's no
north
branches,
and south,
so it's just literally you have about, is it 2.5 miles, I'd say.
You could walk from the Stephen's Green Centre, where Bartley Dunn's was located. You could walk all the way down those south side picturesque Grafton Street into Dame Street, Westmoreland Street, cross over the River Liffey, O'Connell Street, go all the way up the top of O'Connell Street, past the monuments to the Remembrance Garden. And in fairness, you could probably do that at a brisk walk in about 15 to 20 minutes. Yeah. So that's the stretch of,
that's that stretch. And then perpendicular to that is the quays as you go up the river.
And the quays on either side,
It's about 2 miles.
It's significantly longer distance.
Yeah, it's a big long, quay after quay that goes from Houston Station at one end down to the East Wall and out into the Irish Sea. At the other
the Point Depot, what people might know, is the music venue as well down that end. 12 to 12:10 a.m. There are 2 calls back at Charles's house in Monkstown made to the house in the Annesley Mews. We already know Charles is out in Dublin City at this time, so of course he cannot answer the calls. But there is one person in the house who could, and that's the house guest, Bertie Trier. He does not. We know these 2 calls are from Christine Falls, who's intending to move into the place. And in fact, I think the initial arrangements were she was potentially even moving in that day. And Bertie Charles being Charles, maybe he forgot or thought it was the following day. We're going to hear an audio share from Christine. And consequently, this is why she was calling the house, because she was going, because I think she was, no mobiles back then. She was in Dublin and going, Jesus, Charlie, where are you? What's going on here? I've nowhere to stay. SOS.
I had actually been ringing him in those days in a lot of flats, because of course there was no mobile phones. You'd have the old black telephone with the push A for money to go in, push B for return. And I had to go into the main house of my landlord to use the phone. And I was ringing him. I wasn't too surprised that he wasn't there, because he was always out. I was supposed to move in that evening, And I tried several times. And I think the last time I tried was quite late. It was around midnight, possibly later than that. But I cannot remember the exact time. But it was that evening.
Okay. According to the original investigation file, there were 2 calls placed at midnight and at 20 past 12. Does that kind of sound about right?
That sounds absolutely about right, yes.
And I know I appreciate we're going back a long time, but can you remember if those calls connected?
Oh, yes. I mean, there was ring, 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 ring. Yes, absolutely.
And did somebody pick up the phone?
No.
So on both occasions, the call just rang out?
It just rang out, absolutely. I didn't get through.
So, at 11:40, so we're flipping slightly back. They were the calls, and those calls came in at midnight to 12:10, 10 minutes after midnight. But we're flipping back just that half hour. What was Charles doing? Well, Charles, half an hour earlier, and we're into now, this is January the 21st. This is effectively morning of incident of murder. Charles is now across in Borkey at the Hot Pot Cafe. Charles has ordered food. He's chatting to some of the staff. I think there was predominantly female staff at that time. And he's also chatting back and forward, as Charles would do, as his nature, with people in the queue, having a bit of a laugh. He leaves there at 12:05 a.m. And just as with his other movements earlier, Charles was known and recognised by the patrons and bar staff in the pubs he frequented, and including the staff of the Hot Pot Cafe and Borkey. There are witness reports there that Charles was seen in the vicinity of Borkey, close to the public toilet facilities. I can't gloss over this, and I have to mention it. That area was known as something of a pickup point for men sometimes. Now, at this point in our timeline, details become a great deal more conflicting and will delay and confuse the subsequent Garda investigation. We consistently say that witness accounts, no matter how well-meaning, can be wrong and create more confusion than bring clarity to a case. As an example, that Charles picked up 2 young teenage rent boys named Kitty and Ruby at the Hot Pot Cafe. As so much of the chaos and later innuendo in the murder of Charles Self, the 2 boys were later tracked and identified. And while their lifestyles as rent boys did check out, neither were anywhere near the Hot Pot on the night and or at the time, and both had placed alibis on the night in Coolock and Bluebell, 2 separate areas of Dublin. Kitty, a 19-year-old from Bluebell, denied being in the restaurant that night. Witnesses could not identify him, and the taxi man who dropped Charles home was sure he was not the male with him. Ruby from Coolock, also 19 years of age, he had an alibi for the night, and his fingerprints did not match any from the crime scene. And this is a problem when innuendo and rumours start. Times get mixed up, stories get mixed up and invented, and finger pointing commences. Now there's a note here. In reality, Charles Benedict Self was a very cautious soul in regards to his sexuality and behaviour as a gay man. He'd grown up in a tough city as a gay man, coming out, Glasgow. He had a set of rules when he came to Dublin. No one in my house that I don't know. You have to be a friend of a friend before becoming a friend in my house. If I don't like you, you'll know about it within minutes. Charles did not suffer fools or bores. What we can now establish through the actual evidence. At 12:20 a.m, Charles Self and a smartly dressed man in a 2-piece suit, said to be about 25 years of age, with fair hair flopping over his collar, got into a taxi on Eden Quay not Burke Quay. Burke Quay is where the hot pot was. Eden Quay, you'll see it in the maps, is the other side of the quays. This was provided by a key witness, and some evidence would seem to support the witness's account. Dublin taxi driver Patrick Shanley would later come forward after a number of national and radio appeals by Garda. The evidence in his witness statement and account of that night rang true with significant accuracy. Patrick recalled that two men, one well dressed and in his 20s, and the other seemed a little older. They were both quite amorous in the back of the taxi, and the older one had asked to go to Monkstown. He also recalled that the younger well-dressed man seemed a little worse for wear, while the other was far more sober. He dropped the two men off close to the Annesley Mews laneway and distinctly remembers giving Charles £1.30 in change from a £5 note. Remember, we were back in punts back then in 1982. Two further crucial pieces of evidence will come forward to light. Sadly, it will be years before appeals and later review teams could properly piece together the information they already had. More on this shortly. One other detail also matters. At precisely the time taxi driver Patrick Shanley dropped his two passengers off at the Monkstown Annesley Mews, subsequent case examinations would uncover another detail that had been missed. At 12:40 a.m, within sight of the Annesley Mews on Brighton Avenue, at the time in 1982, a senior Irish court judge resided in that area. His home was then under 24-hour Garda protection. A Garda on early morning duty posted there made notes of the movement of Patrick Shanley's taxi in the area. It crucially confirms the time Charles Self arrived home and both men exited the taxi. We know very little after that. The rest of what happened in the early hours of that morning at the Annesley Mews on Brighton Avenue can only rely on witness statements of anyone either in the house or within the neighbouring area.
Directions there in some of the statements, all right. And it's a long time before you get out to Monkstown for £3.70 or the equivalent.
Yeah, I was just gonna remember you get a hand £5 note over and get that far. You wouldn't get a stone's throw in Dublin at this age for that. You need to be charged a £5 before your arse is on the seat of the back seat of the taxi.
For your man to roll down the window,
roll down the window and say, "Where you going?" You're already charged a £5.
Yeah, mad. But so Eden Quay. That's where that's sort of like a train spot or anything. The 49 bus to Tally used to go from there. So some of the buses would go from that area there that were going south, because that's south of the river there as well. It gets even hairier now as we go on, and even less certain.
Yeah. 2 a.m. because remember, we don't know what happens between 12:40 and 2 a.m. So we're switching perspective here. The house guest, Bertie Trier. It's 2 a.m. He will later tell Garda he was woken by conversation in the house downstairs. And he's sleeping in the room used by DJ Vincent Hanley. Remember, Vincent Hanley is away on a work trip. So Bertie Trier, he falls back asleep, but again he's awoken once more, and he claims that a short curly-haired man opened his bedroom door and quickly uttered the words, "Sorry, wrong room." And Bertie will state the male had an Irish-British accent. I think the phrase he used to Garda was a West Brit. We've heard that phrase before. A West Brit accent. I think in his witness statement when he was questioned about this, he said, well, you know, you were in a dark room, and he says, well, yeah, but it was light outside the room, so I could see the darker hair. Oh, okay, fair enough. I will also say the Gardaí did test this account, and in fact they repeated it in an interview with him. In a later interview, they called him back in, and they literally recreated it without him knowing. They were interviewing him, and they got a detective to open the door and stick his head in the door and literally say, oh, sorry, you know, sorry for disturbing you, and leave. And he was then asked, okay, Bertie, do you remember what you told us about the man when you were in your bed? And I want you to now describe that detective who just put his head in the door. And in fairness to Bertie, he once again sketched down and gave details, and it was remarkably accurate to the detective that he just literally briefly saw. And I put that in because I think it's only fair to say that in perspective of what Bertie had said. But look, you know, like I said, witness statements are witness statements. You either take them or you reject them. Now, at 4 a.m, Mary Little. Yes.
Just to mention there, the house was relatively small there as well.
It's a small mews, yeah.
Yeah. So his bedroom, it was. We have a map of it there that we'll show in a minute there. But his room was directly over the living room as well, where he was sleeping, and there was a stairs. The stairs was next to his room, which was next to the living room in the downstairs part.
Yes. Yeah, we're gonna show the maps. I'm gonna show the don't worry. I'm gonna show the full layout of the house.
Yeah.
So 4 a.m, Mary Little, a neighbour who shared a courtyard with Charles Self and Vincent Hanley at the Hanley Mews, heard the sound of this stone bench outside being dragged across the courtyard. When she looked out, she saw a man climbing over the wall. Remember, this is 4 a.m. And what you're seeing there is an image of the back of Charles's Annesley Mews. So you see the 3 windows there. Now I keep referring to it as the back door. That is actually the front door. There's 3 windows. 1, 2, 3. The 2 windows you see, I believe they are the living room windows, and that extreme right hand side window is actually the window coming out of the kitchen. In fact, you in the images that you see in this timeline, you're going to actually see an image, I think, of Charles standing outside in this courtyard with, I think he's got a mug of tea or coffee, and that image is actually taken at a previous time from that kitchen window looking out. Remember that kitchen window, because it's going to play a part very shortly. Now, at 8:50 a.m. in the morning, Bertie Trier awakes and discovers Charlie's body at the bottom of the stairs, covered in blood, lying in a pool of blood, his head against the last step of the stairs, and the main door of the house ajar by Charles's feet. Now later, the door ajar is also something the elderly neighbour, Mary Little, will also report that she had seen earlier that morning. In fact, she even talks about the door being ajar and knowing it was ajar because she could see the slither of light coming through from inside the house with a light on. Bertie steps over Charles and runs to the living room to call an ambulance. He is unable to get a dial tone, so he ran across the courtyard to alert neighbours for help. Our understanding at this point was that the house phone could only receive incoming calls. We've talked about this before, where we've talked about cases of murder cases where people lived in flats rented where the landlord did this kind of thing. In other words, you can't make a call because they were concerned about additional costs on the bill. So you can't make calls. You can get a call, no problem, but you can't make calls.
I got in the flat myself the first time I moved to Dublin.
And anybody, and I lived in the UK in bedsits, shitty places, really decent places, and this, I can assure you, was a very common thing by landlords at the time. They could contact the phone company where they paid the bill and would say, shut the phone off for outgoing calls, only incoming calls. So if the mammy or the friend wanted to call you, no problem, but you couldn't make calls. So it was down to the local call box if you wanted to phone somebody.
The Annie McCarrick case had that as well.
Yeah, we had that.
That's why she
like
was
I said,
starting out the house to make
like I
phone
said,
calls.
it's such a common thing to go on, and people of a younger ilk can get their head around this, but it's so familiar for us.
Yeah.
Now, Bertie Troyer's emergency call is logged at 8:59 a.m. There's Charles, as always, socialising. 9:05 to 10 a.m. Now, a warning here, we are now getting into the crime scene, and there are some very graphic details going to come up. If you don't wish to listen to them, you can forward on, but you're going to miss critical details in this case, but they're important that we have to go through them. The crime scene is quickly established by arriving paramedics and Garda at that 9:05 a.m. time. It's an horrific scene of blood. Charles has clearly been dead for some time. A forensic examination of the scene begins. Important details are noted. It's immediately clear that Charles Self has not fallen down the stairs. This was the initial immediate thoughts of paramedics and Garda that arrived. Oh, maybe he fell down the stairs. This is a murder. Again, outtakes on all graphics that we do. So when you see the graphics here, you're going to be also seeing them in full picture. This is a rather crude, I think, original. They must have been doing this on I don't know, was there a Windows 85 version? They must have been doing this on Windows 85. And in fact, I would first of all say even the body placement is not entirely accurate.
Feet were facing the door.
His feet, the head was to the stairs and feet were quite close.
And actually blocking the door, wasn't it? He said.
Yes, and it took him some effort to get the door open by a foot to get out, even though it was ajar.
It's not to scale.
It's not perfectly to scale. So this is very rudimentary. But there are basics there. Those red splatters you see are literally the trail of blood, starting within the kitchen to your left, moving into the main sitting room next to that stairwell, and then if you actually look, you can actually see those three windows we showed you in the courtyard pictures. Now there was one other detail here. Charles's sweatshirt was awkwardly wrenched up around his armpits. He'd been stabbed 14 times from the front, 6 horrific wounds that were so violently administered that they went clear through his chest and out his back. The knife weapon used is from his own kitchen. It's a meat carving knife with a wooden handle. Charles had actually bought it from Habitat in Dublin city centre. There was also 3 cross-administered slash wounds to his throat, one of them 5 inches long. Just a part A dressing gown cord was tied tightly around Charles's throat. The rest of the cord was tied to the back of a wooden chair in the living room. So it appears parts of the cord that even in whatever went on had become separated. Blood spatter and marks trailed from the rest of the house. That was what was believed from initially starting point where weapon originated, kitchen to living room to that front hallway where the stairway was. The dressing gown and its waistcord belonged to Vincent Hanley, who confirmed to Garda that he had last hung it on the back of the bathroom door upstairs, where he always left it when he went away from the house. Now, I'm not going to say this again before I already know the conspiracy theory. You know, Vincent Hanley was not in the country. He
was in London.
He was away. He was in London. So, no nonsense. What was also clear was that this was some form of prolonged attack, and Charles may at some point have been tied or restrained, be it somewhere or in a chair, which was posited. Charles's stereo unit, even in the hours from 8 to 9 o'clock when Bertie discovers him, was still playing in the living room, and records were also strewn around within the house. We're also going to mention records in the courtyard. Charles was an avid music fan of records and books. In fact, you're going to see from some of the display of images, you're going to see in many of the images of Charles at home, you're going to see those images of records and books around. Very well-read man, very big into his music. It was also very clear to Garda that items of furniture had been moved post-attack, some covering over patches of blood staining. A flower planter box outside the small kitchen window still had been moved and found on the ground outside. Several records from Charles's vinyl collection were found lying outside in the courtyard. Now, you're going to see some images. The first image I'm going to show you is the courtyard without any markups on anything. That is the courtyard. We mentioned a kitchen window. That is the window you're seeing there with the top part slightly open. So just take a good look at that, and then we're going to put in some markups. These are the forensic markups of notable evidence. Okay, so same picture, but with the markups.
And this is to the right of what we saw earlier, the front face one.
This is we're now looking at what was outside. Yeah, those windows that we saw.
Yeah.
So of note, I'm going to start with the two circles at the bottom. Okay, those circles are highlighting a rectangular impression on the paving stones. That's where the bench that you now see sitting against the wall, that high wall, in essence what we're saying is the bench was moved or dragged. The pedestals, the two pedestals you see under that, and this was made of stone, this isn't wood, this is stone, heavy stone. The pedestals were dragged from those two circles, the two pedestals, over either with or along with that bench. Now this bench, I want to stress, I don't believe that bench, because I can see it in perspective to the windowsill, that bench is a sitting bench. It's not a table. It's not a high up table that's 3 or 4 feet, up in the air. It's a sitting bench, and it's been dragged back to the wall. The idea being, and by the way, it wasn't there post crime, so this has happened after the crime. You will also see I think it's 3 stars that I have in there, and they're pointing out LPs or vinyl records which are strewn on the pavement. Also the open window. And the last thing I want to draw to your attention in this image is if you remember back to the original image I showed you of the 3 windows looking out in the courtyard, you notice that there were flower planters. We mentioned the flower planters in each window. This kitchen window, its flower planter is not on the sill anymore. It's below, and it's fallen over, and the soil is spilled out, and it's pointing towards the house and window, not away from it. We're gonna get on sorry, the next image. Just now you have perspective, better perspective. So same scene again. We're now looking at the 3 windows. Okay, so you can still see that flower planter sitting on the ground. So you now have your perspective. Okay, so you can pause. You can take as long as you want to have a look at those, and you can see the door. Okay, the door. By the way, just inside that door is this. That's the stairwell.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's way out of perspective, because like if you look, that staircase looks like in a big.
It's huge, like a grand in a Buckingham Palace. Yeah,
Buckingham Palace. Yeah. And then the body's a little.
This is Muse, and that body placement is not. It's I would say that would be not correct.
The narrow staircase was a small house, and the body would have been like if his head part was at the bottom of the stairs, his foot was at the door, so his body was much bigger than that, like in relation to the staircase.
I think Charles was. He wasn't by any means a small gentleman. Maybe 5, maybe our size, 5'7", 5'8", kind of height. So literally head to door average height.
Yeah.
Okay, so you can take a look at that image. Pause as long as you want on it. We're gonna continue and get more into some of the forensics. So, a blood-stained footprint, size 7 to 8, was also recovered within the house. Outside, an unknown fingerprint was lifted from a drain pipe. If you want to just flick back to the images, you can see the drain pipe, and they believe it was a middle finger, a ringed finger, and they believe there was a ring on it. So that's your hello.
Yes.
That finger. You know what that finger means. While Garda had to be open to every possibility so early on, something was off with the crime scene. There were very clear signs of objects being unnaturally moved or deliberately pushed over. Though clumsily done, after a frenzied attack and later more considered thought, someone was trying to portray a stage scene of an uninvited intruder who panicked and fled the scene. Charles liked his gold jewellery, had an earring, had rings, I think he also wore some chains, some wrist chains as well. None of it, like so many other items of value within the house, were taken. This was no random robbery. While not thought important at the time, remember Patrick Shanley, the taxi driver, the £1.30 in change that he stated in his witness account? 130 was found in Charles's pocket. It will be critical in verifying that the taxi driver Patrick Shanley's account of the night. Small details matter. The forensics told the real story. The challenge was finding out what really happened, how and when it unfolded, and by whom. I'm going to go to Brian just very shortly, but just 2 brief diagrams. These are a bit cleaner and clearer for you, and a bit more perspective, I think, Brian, that you were talking about. The living room, the kitchen, this is downstairs, the ground floor, and that's there. And now you get a bit more compactness, more accurate. And you can see the 3 windows and the doorway. That's ground floor. Now upstairs, briefly, take a look at this, because this is important. What we're also later going to be talking about. The stairs. This is now the stairs up. You have Vinny's room. This is where Bertie would have been staying. Slightly smaller bedroom. And then there's a hot press and a bathroom in the centre. And then there's Charles's, that was what was considered the main bedroom. Slightly
was hanging
bigger.
at the back of,
on the back of the
dressing room was hanging at the back of the bathroom door there.
So the bathroom isn't. Remember, Bertie said he just assumed that the man. Oh, sorry, wrong room. At whatever it was, 2:30 a.m. Maybe was upstairs and was looking for the bathroom. That's where the bathroom is. And the thinking was, oh, he accidentally went to the fourth room. I would tend to think if I said to my guest, oh, you need to go to the toilet. Oh, yeah. Just up the stairs, to your left, and the second door, on your right is what I'd be saying. But, hey, okay. Brian, I'm just going to flick back to that image we have of the evidence markups. So the bench is clearly being moved.
Yeah,
because it's been dragged, which is consistent with Mary Little's account.
Yeah, the
because it's in disarray.
Yeah,
what I find
the pot placement is very strange. That it's
on top. I'm thinking
it's and then so was the part that was an extra boost, I suppose.
That's what I was thinking.
Yeah. And it's I think as well that was an extra boost there, but as well I think, and the other thing as well that bit on the windowsill as well, that the long planter, like what a strange way for that to fall, because you'd think
because it's pointing in.
If somebody went out from outside, you'd expect it to fall outwards, and if somebody came out the window and kicked it, you'd expect it to fall outwards,
but it's pointing inwards.
Strange placement. What happened
so
there,
it's it would suggest somebody was outside, lifted it off and went, holy shit, this is heavy, and dropped it, and it fell over.
Yeah.
The other thing I know is there was suggestion by the Garda at the early stage. We'll go over this. We'll probably talk about this again in the conclusions. The window, that somebody escaped through the window. Okay, knocks the flare planter. Oh, okay, go, whatever about the positioning of it. And I'm thinking, you bail out there. There's records on the outside.
Yeah.
So did you scramble through that window carrying, your Led Zeppelin and your Chet Baker and your Louis Armstrong records, your prize, that I want to get out with? How the hell did you, or did you throw them out? And then you got outside. Then you go, oh shit, that's a very high wall.
I think I revised what I'm thinking there. Actually, it actually makes sense with the pot now, because it's diagonal there. So actually, if somebody came out the window, their head was at the wall end and their foot came out the top. If they stood into the planter and kicked it off, then it would land diagonally like that, wouldn't it?
Okay, maybe, I don't know.
It's just another suggestion.
I just think the planter it's odd that it's pointing. It's fell over inwards.
That would even make more sense than if somebody came out and they.
But then the other theory was trying to be presented was that it was an intruder, and maybe the intruder came in and also left the way they came in. So the intruder knocks over the plant. And then I'm going, well, hang on. When they were leaving, they needed the bench to get out. How the hell did they get over an 8 or 9 foot wall to get in the first place?
Yeah.
So that doesn't make sense.
It's tight as well. I mean, look at that window. I mean, it's that window is.
The
plant there. I mean, I'm guessing like those windowsills are look to be about waist. If somebody's going to be sitting on the bench, their waist height are give or take. Like, imagine squeezing your way through that bloody window at the top there. Like,
carrying your Louis Armstrong and Chet Baker and Led Zeppelin records. Yeah. And then you suddenly throw them on the ground and you don't bother after that.
Yeah.
Well, why wouldn't you fling them over the wall? And then I'll get them when I get up here. And then I'll drag the bench over. Oh, Jesus, that's not enough. And then you take the flower pot, which actually I think that flower pot came from the ring that you see below the window. There's an empty ring there. And I think that's been carried over and put there. But again, the suggestion, we'll come back to this in conclusion. We will revisit this in conclusions.
Yeah.
But again, I can understand why there's a distinct impression this looks very odd and staged. It does not make any sense.
Yeah, there's a sense of panic or something. There's a sense of panic there.
Hello, the door's ajar. Yeah. You're inside the house. Why don't you just leave through the door instead of the window?
There's a sense of panic there.
Yeah, someone is not thinking this through.
Yeah, shifting the stuff around. Jesus, how do I get over here? And then put the pot on top, and it just looks like a bit of a panic. And then trying to make it look staged in some way as well. Like, anyway, yeah.
Okay. Okay, you can see there, that's a news headline there. Over the following hours, family and friends learn of Charles's death, his mother. Unexpectedly, Bertie appears back at work in RTE, Donnybrook, around 2 to 3 p.m, following extensive questioning that morning and giving us statements. And we're going to hear an audio from Alan on Bertie, one of his work colleagues.
I mean, obviously we were all wondering on the day that we heard the news where Bertie was. We knew he was staying with Charles because of difficulties in getting through snow to his Wicklow hideout. And he appeared at about 3 o'clock or so. And I think his way of dealing with what had happened was kind of turning detective. He was, more than willing to go back to the guards and to help them in any way possible. And then, it might have been a week later or less when he was asked to go for another interview, I think to Donnybrook. But from Donnybrook, they took him to another Garda station way away, which was obvious if somebody's coming looking for him in 2 hours' time or whatever. And I think he did about 4 hours of interrogation, basically. Now, I'm not 100% sure about that, but I know he was invited to one Garda station and then brought to another. I think it was during that time that he did the sketch, and he had already said that at some stage during the night he was aware the door opened and somebody who he saw said, "Sorry, wrong room," and closed the door. During his interview, a guard opened the door, said, "Sorry, wrong room," and closed it again. And then Bertie was told to describe him or draw him, I can't remember which, quite accurately. Well, he was obviously very shaken to find that, I believe, at the bottom of the stairs, and all that followed. And then to be isolated, I suppose, too, for the best part of the day with to be fair, some obvious questions to answer. So he was in not a good state when he arrived in.
I was in the RDS. It was a rehearsal. I remember Aggie coming in, Aggie being Agnes Burnell. And Aggie would have known Charles. She would have known. Aggie was also, in those days, she was very involved with fundraising for the Hirschfeld Centre. And she would have been a total gay icon. So she would have had quite a high profile in the gay community in Dublin. So I remember Aggie coming in and looking quite pale. And then Aggie telling me what had happened. And then almost no memory of any kind about how things went, because none of it made sense. It was unbelievably shocking. I had no experience. I had never known or been close to anyone who had been murdered. So there was no roadmap for dealing with something that shocking. And then I remember Aggie because obviously she told me the guards wanted to interview me. And I remember Aggie driving me to Dún Laoghaire Garda station. I remember as well, I'd moved a few little odds and sods into the mews and things, and I wanted to go there. And I had this instinct to just go there. And of course, I wasn't going to be let in or anything, but I went with Aggie. And I think the full shock of what had happened came in when you saw the yellow tape, and then, someone coming up and saying, what's your business here? What are you doing? And then just all of us who knew him going into absolute shock. Now, I would have been a friend, obviously, if someone offers to let you stay in their home, they're a friend. But there were people who were so much closer to him than me. And it was as if a sort of numbness set in for all of us.
The weekend is over. Monday, January the 25th. On the evening, that evening, Charles Benedict Self's body is flown to Glasgow following his post-mortem, where the funeral takes place. A proud Scotsman, he is reunited with his beloved aunt, his adopted mother, as it were. Earlier that day, back in Dublin, a service takes place at St Andrew's Presbyterian Church in Blackrock, with a packed congregation, including the then RTE Director General George Waters. Just to note, when I say back with his aunt had reared him. In fact, I believe the two, her and her sister, two of the aunts actually travelled to Dublin to take the body back home to Glasgow. Now, I know carried in the Irish Times from Charles Self's family in Scotland read, coming from the aunt, I wish to express my sincere thanks to all his friends and colleagues in Ireland for the kindness shown to the family during a time of much distress. In particular, I would like to pay tribute to the help and support given to us by Radio Television Sharon and the spiritual guidance of the church ministers in attendance. Now, Detective Superintendents Hubert Reynolds and Michael Sullivan leads the case at this stage, and they lead a team of 30 detectives investigating the murder of Charles. The initial focus of the investigation is on those two rent boys we heard earlier as suspects, Kitty and Ruby. We know they were later eliminated. In those opening weeks and months, no one expected we would still be here with questions 43 years later. The initial years of that investigation, from 1992 and right through to date, this span of time would see many reiterations and reviews of the murder of Charles Self. Times were changing in Ireland, but not for the better. Garda resources were increasingly under pressure. A new wave of drug culture was beginning. Organised ganglands, the emergence of HIV positive cases, and the beginning of the AIDS hysteria seemed to completely derail the Charles Self investigation. The rising culture of the time, and this includes within An Garda Síochána and the general public, set the tone. By the summer of 1982, the Irish media and public had finally got over the weather, and a then unknown middle class guy just decided to murder a nurse and a farmer and shack up with the state's Attorney General. We have a Radio Espial episode on that, and I think there was even, Brian remind me, I think even the collapse of the government happened.
Yeah,
so this was pandemonium was happening in the country. So you can understand all these distractions, and the media very quickly after this horrible murder suddenly turning their attention to so many other things that were happening. Of course, Malcolm MacArthur case, was happening. Declan Quinn's case would come later, Meanwhile, gay attacks began to increase, and in September 1982, Declan Flynn was murdered in Fairview Park in a queer-bashing attack. All 5 teenagers charged received suspended sentences. I'm not sure what Charles would have thought about that, and it certainly wasn't the beginning of the end. In July 1985, Father Niall Malloy is killed in Cocorsey House, Clara, County Offaly, on the 8th of July 1985. No one has ever been convicted in relation to his death. Coincidentally, I want to stress, he's actually the uncle of Bill Maher, who we mentioned in this case. And by the way, we also did an episode on the Father Malloy case.
That's another one that generated loads of gossip and chatter
all
wrong. Like, I mean, they people said some, awful stuff about him as well. Like, and that one's, well, it seems it was solved all right, but it just wasn't not officially, like,
So in April 1987, Vincent Hanley died of AIDS-related complications, one of the first well-known celebrities to die in Ireland. Change was slow in Ireland. The Irish don't like change one bit. The investigation team pretty much reflected attitudes at the time. Hundreds of witnesses were interviewed, friends, colleagues of Charles, but it became trapped in a quagmire at the time where witnesses felt they were being less interviewed about an horrific murder. Rather, they were part of a larger compilation of data about the Dublin gay scene, and Charles was simply an awkward murder case with a likely gay culprit, and the larger political culture and direction in Ireland seemed more important to clean up. Within months, the gay community in Ireland were responsible for everything: the declining moral standards, the rise in HIV cases, the exploding heroin addiction in major cities in Dublin, Cork, Limerick and elsewhere, and the challenge to marital status and the right to life and anti-abortion movement growing then. Somehow, they were in some smaller or larger way responsible for the moral decline in Ireland. Charles Self's murder had no hope of being solved in that climate and attitude. He was just another gay man murdered by one of our own. Much in the way we talk now of a gangland criminal killing. The infamous Rent Boys, Ruby and Kitty's fingerprints were never found at the Monkstown property. Bertie Trier was in his 60s as the house guest in the Annesley Mews on the night and morning of January 20th into 21st, 1982. He lived in Arklow and owned his own house there, but stayed with Charles the odd time. During the investigations, Bertie was asked to describe and draw a sketch of the man who came to his bedroom doorway, during the early morning of January the 21st. A man he later described as having had curly dark hair. He stated he was sure of this because the man was in the silhouette and light of the hallway outside of the room. Bertie's sketch has never been released to the public by Garda. Beyond voices downstairs during the night at 2 a.m, the disturbance by the stranger at his bedroom doorway, he has stated that he knew nothing of what went on in the house until he got up around 8:50 a.m. to find the body of Charles. He also stated that he was not aware of any phone calls to the house around 12 a.m. This the Christina Falls calls. We know there were two from Christine. Garda have never disclosed the full timeline of his witness statement. At 66 years of age, it has been suggested that his hearing might have been poor and that he already had gone to bed by 12 a.m, 12:40 a.m. when Charles arrived home. In 1995, Bertie Trier later moved to Sandymount, Dublin. He died at the age of 80 of a heart attack at St Vincent's Hospital on the 5th of December 1995. 1996, Alpha O'Reilly, the man who brought Charles Self to Dublin, pulled into a petrol station at Ashford, County Wicklow at 3 a.m. on the 2nd of January 1996, filled up his apple green Mitsubishi car and drove off in the direction of Wexford. Neither he nor his car were ever seen again, and that will be part of our next timeline coming up that Brian will be covering. 2017. Following an RTE crime call appeal at this time, and after so many years of timed limited detail, countless case reviews, the Garda investigation is a lot more focused than in the original timeline in years. We know the two Rent Boys have been excluded. Significantly, we learn that the fair-haired man in the taxi of Patrick Shanley had come forward. He had been excluded, citing marital reasons why he did not come forward originally. To my knowledge, his fingerprints were also not found in the house, but I remain intrigued as to why he exited the taxi at Annesley Mews. Did he live there? Did he live in the area? This has never been fully explained by Garda as to why he was excluded from the case. Brian, before we get into our conclusions and analysis, any further thoughts?
I suppose it's never been fully explained who the hell he was either, right?
Yeah, and we'll talk about that in the conclusions. Yeah, and I found that completely. It is one of the single most baffling things.
Considering you're only dealing, you can count on one hand the number of people you're dealing with.
Like, hello, how many witnesses do we have?
Yeah, just Mary Liddell, Bertie Trier.
Yeah, Mary Liddell is an elderly lady. She didn't kill him. You know, how many witnesses do we have?
And the lad across the road at the judge's house. So we're looking at that's that's and Charles said himself. So that's all. You have the two lads. You have the guard. You have Mary Liddell, and Charles. So even including the victim, you can count them all in one hand.
Yeah.
So, but the other thing, the other strange one as well is the guy who picked him up earlier on, the guy who gave him a lift. He's never named either. Like, it's funny how they named the taxi driver, they didn't name
yeah. I don't know. It's simply always described as the sympathetic driver. Now, in fairness, the relevance on that, I'm sure at that time of the year. But there was a thaw there. I mean, it's not like people were battling through blizzards and 2 foot of snow, like, that there was a thaw at that stage. But I suppose over the few weeks, motorists had learned to be a bit more sympathetic, and the difficulties people were having with sporadic bus travel and what have you. So it was described as a sympathetic driver who dropped them in, and that seemed to be the end of it. And of course we know Charles was fully alert and well at that stage, so there's no implication towards him in any way. Now, what I'm going to start with is just to pull everything together. Okay, so before we begin, I'll pull the visuals together. These are the places that Charles visited on the Wednesday, January the 20th, 1982. So we have the sympathetic private driver who picked him up and dropped him from Donnybrook to O'Connell Street. We have the Bailey Duke Street. We have the South William Street Inn. We have Bartley Dunn's, the Hot Pot Cafe, and then we have home from Eden Quay to Monkstown.
And bear in mind as well, 1982, there was Grafton Street wasn't pedestrianised.
Yep.
There was no Stephen's Green shopping centre, and it was easier to get around by bus and so on there, and there was no dart either. Yeah,
so you can look at all those points. I'm not going to go through them individually. You can see them 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and you can follow. So that is those blue dots. They're essentially of the map of the entire evening from 8 p.m. through to 12:20 a.m. at Eden Quay, and you can follow. So he's in a traverse from partially over the north side of the city on the River Liffey, down predominantly into the south side, and then back up. Now, from the outset, this horrific murder investigation of Charles Self was hampered by attitudes and an endemic culture of its time to people in the gay community. The handling of the case from the beginning was poor, and despite an abundance of evidence, witnesses, it was a case that could and should have been solved within weeks, and yet, 43 years later, it still has not reached any conclusion. At a time when we had some more notable suspects to pursue, RTE broadcaster Pat Kenny was interviewed about his work colleague and his association with him at the time, Charles. To a point under questioning, it was even put to him if he was one of them boys. You're going to hear from Pat Kenny talking about when he was approached by Garda about this case.
I got a phone call sometime after the investigation had started, weeks I would think, and the guards identified themselves and said, look, we are investigating the murder of Charles Self. Were you acquainted with him? And I said, yes, I was. And I said, why are you calling me? And they said, well, we were going through his contacts book and we're going through every name, and now we've come to the case. Pat Kenny's there under K, or words to that effect, so we're calling you. And I said, that's fine. And they said, were you ever in the Mews in Monkstown? And I said, no, I never was. That's where his body was found, where he lived. And then they said, how well did you know him? And I explained, just as I've explained to you, that he was a designer on the show, and that would be the reason for my name being in his contact book. 1982, no mobile phones, so everyone had to contact each other by landline. And that's how it was, that we all had each other's telephone numbers for calling each other for business purposes. So they got to me and they said, look, we'd love to come around and talk to you sometime about your contacts with Charles Self. And they said, where do you live? And I said, the Mews, to the rear of number 82 Leinster Road, which is where I lived. And there was a silence when they heard Mews. And then they heard me say, I lived in a Mews, and this made some uncanny contact in the Garda mind. So they said, we'll be around shortly. Will you be there? And I said, sure. And within, I'd say, an hour, they were knocking on my door. And they came in and they sat me down and I welcomed them, offered them tea, coffee, whatever. And they asked me the same questions that you've been asking about how well I knew, and I explained everything. And I couldn't really help them in any shape or form. And then they said, do you mind if we ask you a question? And I said, no, fire away. And they said, you wouldn't happen to be one of them boys yourself, would you? I was shocked and aghast, and also somewhat amused, because by that they meant, was I gay? And I said, no, I don't happen to be one of them boys myself. And then they started to talk, and there was a lot of homophobic stuff in their conversation about the nature of investigating the gay scene in Dublin and all the rest of it. And shortly after that, they left.
Now remember, this case had a very graphic crime scene, a very sociable victim with regular patterns, and someone with a wide circle of friends and public places he frequented to meet work colleagues and enjoy his still young life at 32 years of age. Headed by 2 senior detectives, a further 30 detectives working the case in the first few weeks and months, from numerous witness statements, more time seemed to be spent in investigating the gay community and building a database on suspects than actually following up on specific crime scene evidence already available. And slowly but surely the case of Charles Self took a backseat to new emerging cases like, as we've talked about, Malcolm MacArthur, his murders, and the murder of Declan Flynn, that 1982 summer. No matter which way we look at this case, and in spite of the questions over the fair-haired man in the taxi who accompanied Charles from Eden Quay, Dublin city centre, to Monkstown, and what happened to him after that, I keep coming back to Bertie Trier, the house guest that night, and the questions and anomalies his account raises on the night and following morning, January 20th into the 21st. Bertie arrived at Charles's home with keys sometime after 11 p.m. 1 hour later, the house phone rings twice, about 12 midnight, just after, and shortly we know from telecom call logs that these came from Christine Falls, who was due to move in. While I can understand a one-night temporary guest not wishing to answer a house phone, not his, he makes no mention of them to Garda in his own statements. Perhaps he didn't hear the phone ringing in the living room, or maybe already having retired upstairs to the smaller bedroom. He states that around 2 a.m. he was aware of voices downstairs, presuming Charles had returned home with someone. Over the following 2 hours, he is awoken again by someone opening his bedroom door and apologising for disturbing him. He would later provide a sketch of this person to Garda. Yet, by 4 a.m, he does not hear what we discover later to be a stone chair or bench dragged across the courtyard to a wall, heard and witnessed by adjacent neighbour Bertie Liddell. You've seen the images of that bench. While I can appreciate Bertie was 66 years of age, perhaps not possessed with the quality of hearing he may once have had, I'm struggling to balance his cognitive and audible abilities to note voices downstairs prior until the time of 2 a.m. and someone opening the door of his room briefly, but not hearing a man downstairs brutally being stabbed 14 times, possibly tied to a chair during his ordeal, fleeing from a kitchen into a living room to a hallway in an attack that had to be frantic and loud. Further, not hearing the sound of a stone bench being dragged across the courtyard outside the Monkstown, Annesley. That would have also included furniture within the house we now know that was also dragged and moved. Notwithstanding, we know the furniture was moved in the early hours of the morning. A stereo was also playing downstairs in the living room, but all this activity just happened to pass Bertie by, unheard, until the scene he discovered at 8:50 a.m. on Thursday morning. The very small rear window in the kitchen was open. The front door was ajar. Bertie arrived at the Annesley Mews at around 11 p.m. from work in Donnybrook RTE and stated to Garda that he was in bed when Charles arrived home. That was 12:40 a.m. We know that now. We must look at evidence at the house. Remember the images we showed you of the house layout. There was only one bathroom, upstairs, right between the larger and smaller bedrooms. The bathroom was where the cord from the bathrobe gown was kept hanging on the door. It was a part of the downstairs crime scene. How did it get there, and who moved it that night morning from the bathroom to the living room? The dressing gown itself was still in the bathroom. So someone consciously took that cord and went downstairs. They took it off the gown and brought it downstairs. The gown did not belong to Charles. It belonged to Vincent Hanley, and Vincent wasn't there that night. Charles's sweatshirt was also pulled up to his armpits. Why? Early on, detectives postulated some form of sex game involving the cord of the dressing gown on the chair. Is it possible the positioning of the sweatshirt is more down to Charles's body being pulled and moved from one place to another while incapacitated, dying or deceased? All these years later, Bertie's statement and recollection still doesn't fit with the evidence and circumstances. It simply doesn't make sense because parts of it are very precise. The mail at the door, the sketches he produced, times he arrived home and went to bed, and yet all that was going on downstairs that night, we must believe Bertie slept through it. I always question witness statements that contain very precise and specific details and yet exclude basic evidential details that should have been noted, seen or heard. The original investigation raises its own concerns. We've touched on some of those. Patrick Shanley's taxi driver statement evidence, I believe, is crucial. Charles's body the following morning was found with the £1.30 in the pocket, £1.30. From me, that copper fastens his account, together with the Garda on duty at the judge's house. After 43 years on Garda Síochána can do all the appeals they want, but they need to come clean with the reasons why they excluded the 25-year-old man in the taxi to Monkstown. I understand that they do not wish to compromise confidences and information given, but we are still left with the question as to where he went that night, if not to Charles's house. His prints were not, as we understand, found in the house, and I get that, but we know one third-party set of prints from the kitchen where the assault and horrific attack likely began, and it came from the kitchen, the attack. This set of prints were never identified. So who else at the Annesley Mews at 12:40 a.m. when Charles arrived home? Well, that's easy to answer. It's Charles, the victim, who's arrived home, and it's Bertie Troyer, who's the house guest and already there. And of course we have our mystery man in the taxi. That, or we believe that the man in the taxi with Charles did accompany him inside. Despite what the Garda presented, they need to come clean with the reasons why this man was eliminated in future appeals. It isn't good enough 43 years later to simply say he was eliminated. Or are we to believe that another random unknown person arrived at the door that night and carried out this murder? If so, why haven't we heard about this unknown assailant in appeals? No, because there wasn't another assailant. There are only two possible people who carried out this murder, unless more evidence comes to the surface in the case. The mystery taxi companion Charles travelled home with, or his house guest staying there that night. In the initial forensic stages, don't ask me why, Garda wrongly fixated working theories that a person entered the house from the front and exited through a tiny kitchen window with a clear staged crime scene. The plant moved from the kitchen sill to the ground. Furniture moved back after the murder. It was clear that killer wanted to give the impression of someone forcing their way in through the main entrance and exiting through the tiny kitchen window. There was no evidence of forced entry. Charles liked his gold and flamboyance. All of that remained there. Nothing was stolen. The attack began in the kitchen and led out in the opposite direction to the main entrance. In other words, the killer left through the courtyard, leaving the door ajar deliberately. If they left. Garda are pretty certain the murder happened between 2 and 4 a.m. And at 4 a.m, we already know Mary Little witnessed a man scaling the courtyard wall and disappearing into an adjacent garden, according to her account. That account I'm 50-50 on. And I'm 50-50 on because I've seen that wall and it's a public area. So there's no garden on the other side. So remember, Bertie has the keys to the Annesley Mews. So there's no need for him to be scaling high walls at 4 a.m. and likely unable to at 66 years of age. So who is this person if Little's account is accurate? And if so, is he the actual killer? To this day, Garda have never given any detail on the missing 8-inch knife from the kitchen. Was it missing from the crime scene? Was it found at the crime scene? And if so, where exactly was it found? Was it found within Charles's body, beside the body, or was it never found? Were fingerprints lifted from it? We've never heard any of those details. For a case so old, countless national TV and radio appeals over 3 decades, one would at least think a highly advanced case investigation team on the brink of a breakthrough will be willing to share a little more detail to get this over the line to an arrest and conviction. Or is it that they can't make an arrest and conviction because the person's not around anymore? In reality, while sobering and disappointing, 43 years on, the real culprit is either very elderly or has passed away. And for this reason, this case as an example, and there are several others like this, I believe there should be a statutory obligation for Garda Síochána to place all evidence gathered not just within the Department of Public Prosecutions but also on public file where no arrest of a case charge has been brought in a murder case that is essentially non-active after a period of 30 years plus 10 if an arrest or significant review of the case occurred in that latter period. But for a few remaining friends alive who knew and loved Charles, there are no immediate relatives to champion this case, prod and push it along, keep asking questions of Garda Síochána and yearly reviews. 2 women looked after the removal of Charles's remains back to Glasgow and laid him to rest. 2 aunts, one his adopted mother, the other the sister. They have long passed away in an investigation that seemed to veer off on its own data gathering process in the gay community. This is one case that has gathered dust in the archives, forgotten, and yet in that cold late January 1982, the big snow, for a few days, perhaps even a few weeks, it was the talk of the town in Ireland. Until the better weather came along and the next gay murder the media could fuss about, and it did come along. The murder of Charles self should have been solved in the days and weeks of the original Garda investigation, and a real focus and direction, much like the weather at the time. There are but a slither of pointers as to what happened in this case. The mysterious taxi companion, the fleeing person at 4 a.m, the staged crime scene. You don't stage a crime scene if you're a complete stranger to the victim. Brian?
Yeah, it's so much in that. I know you boiled it down to that couple of minutes there.
As best I can.
I know, no fair dues to you. You boil that down well, because there's just so much in this now at this point. So fair dues on that. I think there's just so many questions there that, like, you know, particularly you've got three characters here now. Well, supposedly you have the fair-haired guy in the cab.
Yep.
The guy who came into the bedroom who wasn't fair-haired.
Curly-haired guy, short curly-haired guy. Yeah.
Yeah, the guy jumping over the wall, and then you have you have Mary Lee Dillon, the taxi driver, and Bertie Troyer. Now, the only guy who's reliably there was the fair-haired guy in the cab. The others, it's hazier, like. But, like, again, if this guy was eliminated, then they weren't clear either. Was his fingers, the person who was that not his fingerprints, the ones that were found on the drain pipe or on the pipe? There was fingerprints found.
Yes,
at the scene.
they're unknown.
And they were eliminated. Was this guy eliminated?
Yeah, that's my point. I cannot understand how this guy. On what basis was this guy eliminated?
Yeah. So they should be clear on that. That's one thing. I think there's a bit of contradiction here as well, and you touched on it there, Mick. I think Charles Self was careful, as you said. Yes. He didn't want anybody in the house. He didn't know, etc., etc. No, I think he was new. He didn't want anybody. He didn't know in there, and had to be, you know, somebody had to be introduced in properly to him. So the guy in the cab, if he was getting friendly with the guy in the cab there, so that would tend to imply that he knew him, maybe. And also in an era when it wasn't safe to be openly gay like that, in a situation like that, then was the cab driver also gay, or was he tolerant or of that, or what, like that? It didn't seem to be out of character there for Charles Self if he was more careful in those situations. So I think that would seem to imply that he knew the guy as well, like. And then
can I just come?
Yeah.
That always struck me, as well as Bartley Dunn's was his last port of call.
Yeah.
This was considerably, of all the venues he went to, Bartley Dunn's was considerably more of, would have had much more of a gay community in it. Often called the last port of call at night. Yeah. And that does lead me to believe, as you say, that he could quite possibly have known that person in the taxi. Yeah. This wasn't, as the Garda tried to suggest, this wasn't some cruise to Eden Quay to, you know, or Borkey to the toilets to just pick up some random. That's not the way Charles Self behaved. That he had met someone that he actually knew.
Yeah. And there's only a few possibilities there, because either this guy, they said in some of one of the clips in, say, in the Declan Flynn documentary there, they said in relation to this case, they said that, you know, the entire gay community in Dublin was a questioned or was looked at and so on. So we're talking about a relatively small community there. It was a subculture in Dublin, relatively small community. So, like, either this guy was a member of that community, in which case somebody should have known him, or,
you know, there are claims that there is a dossier in that Charles Self murder of the gay community, and we're not talking about a small community. We are talking about 1,500 people.
Yeah.
When in the hell, in a serious murder case, do you have so many people interviewed?
I know. I suppose my point is, Mick, it was still a relatively small number of people. Okay, 1,500 people sounds like an awful lot, but in a city of whatever it was then, 500,000 or whatever. Like, I was saying is it's still a relatively smaller number of people, and particularly given the areas that people would have frequented. I think I'm not saying all gay people knew all gay people in Dublin.
Yeah, no,
what
I
I'm
know what you mean.
saying is that there was a community there, and if Charles Self knew this guy, then if he was a member, that the chances are there was other people would have known him as well, or could have, if they're out and about that night, might have seen him at the bus stop. I'd just say that the guy should have been identifiable if he was a member of the community. Chances are he could have been identifiable. The other thing is maybe he wasn't a member. That's
the thing, and that seems to be the suggestion as to why, when he was eliminated, that it was for reasons that this guy was not an active participating member of the gay community. In other words, he was married. He was considered publicly in his work, his normal activities, to be a straight guy, and this is why he hadn't come forward.
Yeah, but you wonder, did the taxi driver know him as well then? Because I mean, it wouldn't have, it said it might have raised a couple of eyebrows if two fellas are, getting friendly in the back of a taxi.
I don't know. Like in fairness to Patrick Shanley, his name is out there. I don't get the impression that he knew them as such, but his details were extremely precise, and precise to the point of where he could even tell them the money that was handed over, and the change that he gave out, and the details of it. As much as I know, the friends of Charles Self were very uncomfortable with his account. His account was the one that actually proved the most remarkably accurate, because you don't find a body strewn, stabbed multiple times in their own blood, and just suddenly happen to name exactly the amount of money that's going to be in their pocket. That tells you this guy was a man of detail and took detail into account and was compos mentis of what was happening that night. So it's why I tend to believe more his account. And I know friends of Charles Self are uncomfortable, as much as they were uncomfortable with the two rent boys, are uncomfortable with that idea of, well, Charles wouldn't have behaved that way, he wouldn't have brought a man, back to the house, without us kind of knowing him or going, you're all right there, Charles, he seems all right, or, you're safe there, but as you say, does that suggest the person with him in the taxi was somebody known to him?
Yeah, that's what I say. I mean, again, I don't know, I wasn't there. I'm just putting it together from the other accounts of his general behaviour, and as well, like, given if he's inside in Bartley Duns, he'd probably be more relaxed than if he's standing at the bus stop. He's not going to be as, how would you say, flamboyant or whatever.
He can be more flamboyant and open in Bartley Duns. He has to be more caged and probing, more reserved at the standing at a key.
And you'd expect he'd be more reserved at the back of the taxi as well. But it's so again, that would suggest that he would have may have known him. Again, we're only speculating again now, and that's the other thing as well. The word you use, Mick, an awful lot of postulating with certain things there, like the thing about the sex game, the thing about the some of the other stuff with the rent boys, even at the start there earlier, and so on as well. So we got to avoid falling into that trap either. Like, but the
crime scene, Brian. We said we'd come back to this because I think it is significant.
It is,
I'd my own thoughts on that are. We can show the pictures again of the crime scene. It does look staged to me. It looks like some sort of fucking circus clown set this up and just wasn't thinking through, because none of it makes sense. You've got, let's be blunt. Is Bertie the culprit? If Bertie's the culprit, Bertie, you've got a set of keys. Why would you go to all this fuss? You know, you can walk out, in and out the door, pretend you were never there. You know, you've got the set of keys. Why would you go to all this trouble?
Yeah.
Guy in taxi. Well, you're with Charles. You get out of the taxi. You go into the home. You're already in the home. Why the need for all this elaborate? You know, you've got somebody to pin it on because they're sleeping upstairs. It's none of this kind of makes any sense.
Yeah. I don't think this size 7 or 8 is, well, that would be a relatively small size for a man, is in the foot.
It's very small, isn't it?
So, because I mean, you usually expect them. Well, I know people are different than this, but you generally expect to a man it's going to be 9
or 10 or 11. Yeah.
It's more sort of a big woman's foot than a small man's foot, like, isn't it? So, not that'll be.
Yeah. Okay. People have small feet. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, they do. Yeah, and but it seems kind of a funny size like that now. And but I think wasn't your man Yorkshire Ripper was around that size.
Yeah. Very.
With the Wellingtons, all right. Yeah, so I mean, there is men with those size feet, like, but it's kind of, it still seems relatively small for a man, like. And the other thing was, I know Mary Liddell was elderly, correct?
Yes, quite elderly. Yeah.
So, so she was.
And I tell you, Mary Liddell, she doesn't seem to have got too much sleep that night. She seemed to be more at the curtains, peering out on what was going on.
And she was outside the home, and Troyer was inside, and he seemed to have missed.
He's there, and he misses most things. And Mary Liddell lives opposite, and she's virtually seen out. She's hearing, you know, activity going on in the house. She's seen the door ajar. She's seen a man, the bench being dragged. She's seen a man clambering over. You know, and if you're hearing a bench being dragged across a courtyard and your attention is drawn to that, you are naturally drawn to the window and looking out the window going, what the hell is going on out there? And you're going to remain there to see what's going on. So you're going to be watching. Yeah, it's not like that bench wasn't dragged over in 1 minute. That took quite an effort on time to drag over there. So if she heard all that, she had considerable time to take in all the details that she took in. And it's hard, in fairness, despite her being elderly, it's hard to escape the fact that there wasn't someone who did exit over that wall. And if that's the case, then you go, well, then that couldn't really been Bertie.
Yeah. So you wonder, like, was someone there beforehand?
And that is one of the other possibilities. I think Frank Greeny, wasn't it, who's covered this case and did extensive research that we also looked at, has also postulated, you know, all that shenanigans outside in the corridor. Are we possibly not witnessing? It's not somebody who committed the crime. It's somebody going, I'm getting the hell out of here before this crime happens. I'm bailed out. Could that be our person in the taxi? And they had nothing to do with the actual crime itself. But we're going, I'm getting the hell out of here. It's all kicking off.
Yeah, because your man was there. Your man came back late, only an hour beforehand.
Yeah.
Troyer. So, like, somebody could have been there.
Yeah,
for a while beforehand, but
and of course, how do they? If somebody comes in as an intruder from outside, they needed a bench to get over one side, but they don't need a bench to get over the other side. So how the hell did they get in from the other side? That doesn't make sense.
Doesn't either, no. And but the other thing is, well, the noise like that. This is, you know, late night, early hours in the morning. This wasn't the city centre. This is Monkstown.
Oh yeah. It's quiet.
So. Yeah, it's quite. So, like, it's going to be, you know, decibels are a relative thing. So, like, it's you know, it's like if somebody was if you were sitting in at home in the afternoon, or it was during the day. If someone moved the bench, you go, geez, how's that? But if it happens at 2 o'clock in the morning, you'd be going, oh my God.
Yeah.
What's going on out there? Like it's going to be a very loud noise at night when it wouldn't be during the day because there's cars passing and so on. So I think the noise would have stuck out, and the clattering about there as well.
And also the simple things, like there was light coming from the house.
Yeah.
We're all used to at certain times where we look out or we're up or we go to get up during the night and we go to the toilet and you look out and you see the neighbour's house and you expect to see them all in darkness. Everybody's gone to bed. But you look out and then you suddenly say, geez, they're up very late, they're the kind of things you notice, that light, the stereo being on all night, right through to when Bertie comes down.
Yeah.
So, there are other things. There's so many small things that are important, and you go.
I think the noise is the noise is just one thing. Like I remember when we lived in the first flat we lived in London, and when both of us, myself and my wife, and every night at about. It was funny because, if I was working in the morning, obviously trying to be in bed as early as possible, but every night about 20 past 11, this guy used to drive past in this really noisy motorbike.
Yeah, and you recognise them. Yeah.
Yeah, and it was like every night you go, if you were in bed, you'd be going, and so you're waiting for the other shoe to drop, and then you'd hear it go past, and it was the same time. I think it was something like 7 minutes past 11 every night. This guy drove past him.
Because he's coming home from work, or
it's
routine, yeah.
But it's funny, that noise used to stick up, but you kind of almost got used to it, not quite, because you used to always be going, oh, there he goes, yeah, and then you'd fall asleep after or whatever. But so I think the noises thing is important here, like, because
when there's noises outside of the norm,
the normal thing, yeah.
Because people will often talk, they live next to airports, railway stations, and you go, geez, that must be a nightmare, and they go, no, because it's so regular, they switch off to it, but they hear noises that are irregular. That will wake them up.
That's the thing wake them up. So, and I think this thing, that wasn't a silent encounter there. Like, this thing that happened here. It's just like there would have been dragging. There would have been the chair thing. There would have been,
it screams. You don't get stabbed 14 times without screaming or making any kind of sound. All the, be it staging or not, all the movement of furniture within the house being moved around, let alone what was going on outside with flower planters and flower pots and benches being moved and scrambling over walls and lights going on, lights off.
Yeah. And your man wasn't specific either. Like, how many, it's like there was conversations downstairs. It's not really specific how many people was there. Was it just the one, or was it more than one? Like, He
seemed to suggest that that Charles was in conversation possibly with just one person.
Just one person.
I think there's even mention, and again, it's all very, oblique, and there could have been raised voices maybe at one stage. I wasn't quite sure because I really was asleep, Well, you really were asleep, but you were awake at least 2 or 3 times, during that night. You were only in bed for, an hour and a bit, Then you were disturbed. Then you were disturbed half an hour later. It's just.
It is. It's funny that sort of I don't know. This thing, it just there's an awful stink off this case, like there really is, like, because you just go like, there's, why is certain stuff redacted there? Like, it's, it's like, I'm not saying that people should be, I'm not to be name and shame. That's not what I'm saying at all.
No,
I'm saying like, there's stuff is redacted there that, like, in other cases they wouldn't think twice about naming somebody or whatever. But I know it's kind of like, this, it's all just very fishy. The stuff there, and there has to be something. There's something else underneath all of this here. Like, there's something else underneath all this with the players involved here as well.
Yeah, that's what I said. Like I said, and it's what I've emphasised. And as we conclude, there was enough in the first week of this investigation to either have pursued it and made an arrest and made some proper conclusion as to what went on. But instead, they went off on chasing rent boys and exploring the homosexual community. And here we are 43 years later, and you're going, guys, could you seriously could not figure this one out?
Yeah,
with all
because it
you
was very
had
selective.
at the time.
Yeah, because that's the point, and we're kind of talking about it earlier as well, Mick. But like, off outside the show, but like, it's funny they seem to put the sweats on a whole bunch of people. It's like they moved in the gay community, they kind of sweated them a bit. You know, the thing with high profile presenter there, Pat Kenny had a few things thrown in, but it's funny how like the people at the core of it, those people we could count on one hand. They didn't put the sweats on them too much.
3-4 people on one hand.
Yeah. One possibly imaginary, or two possibly imaginary.
There you go. You've got your culprit is somewhere there. Like, there's no mysterious person far off away in another field that has never got mentioned, or you already have the culprit within your grasp. You just have to press and figure it out. And it seemed that there was no will to do that.
Yeah. Yeah, so it's unfortunately, so sadly, we're still the same stage as 43 years ago, and you just don't know. This guy was never identified publicly. Well, the couple of guys there, you don't know who they were, so whether they could be alive or dead or happily, married with grandchildren or passed away or whatever. We just don't know, like.
Yeah. Well, after 43 years, my inkling is our culprit, whoever, is probably more than likely no longer with us. That's really it for our timeline. Thank you for joining us on Radio Espial. Our timelines and insider episodes may be a little bit more periodic going forward. We've an awful lot of work on our plate now. That has to be the way it is. We are hoping, again, touch wood, we are hoping to get an insider edition to you next weekend after this episode, and hopefully the following week then I think we'll be revisiting the Alfie O'Reilly timeline in full. That's where we are, everybody. Thank you again to Brian for joining me. God bless everyone, and we will see you hopefully next week. Take care.
Thanks for tuning in, folks. All the best.
Okay, take care. Thanks for your support.